perhaps you could just give us a brief background on how you yourself decided to get into the exploration mining game and the route that you took after high school.
Well, I grew up in South Africa and I didn't like it very much. By the time I was 11 or 12 in 1967, 68, I didn't want to live in South Africa anymore. I begged my parents to let me go overseas. I also didn't want to have anything to do with the family business. My granddad was a founder with his partner Herself. My dad loyally went into the business and served with Bob Herself's son Basil for years, running Anglo-Val in a partnership. And I saw this and saw the constraints and obligations that went with that sort of responsibility in a South African context, and I decided I didn't want anything to do with this. So I begged to go to boarding school. I went away to Swaziland and then I went to England where James we met. We went to rugby school together, and I think at that stage I was a bit idealistic and a bit arrogant, and I thought I could become a very successful nuclear physicist. And Professor James MacDonald and I ended up in the top science sets doing A-levels, but very much at the bottom of the top science sets. Very bright people, and we were the least bright of bright people. I found nuclear physics extremely difficult and mathematics confusing. James and I also loved to climb mountains, and we joined the commando section of the combined cadet force at rugby school in Warwickshire and climbed the peaks of Scotland and Wales, and eventually ended up climbing the peaks in Switzerland of the Alps around the basin in which the mat sits today. And I do remember once on a school expedition, it must have been in 1971, August or so, we were on top of the Rimfischhorn. The Rimfischhorn is a 4,000 metre plus peak near Zermatt, and a small cloud shaped like a disc headed fast towards us, and our guide and teacher, Mr. Tyson, said hide quickly and cuddle each other, because this was pure ice and we were heading right into frostbite. So James and I huddled together, cuddling each other. We sat on a rock and we held tight while all around us the air dropped to minus 20 degrees centigrade and tried to survive. There were drops for 2,000 feet on each side of us. And beneath our bottom was a garnet schist, and I remember a garnet twice the size of my fist, just below my right thigh, and I looked at it and I looked at James. We didn't know what we were going to do, 16-year-olds. And I said, James, let's become geologists. We'll be able to climb mountains and be paid for it. And he looked at me and he said, that's a good idea. And that was pretty well it. I mean, that was my decision. I was impulsive at the time. But, of course, discovered immediately in geology a wonderful world of semi-science, intuition, induction, and detective work, and fell in love with that and began to look at what it meant. In the gap between school and university, I worked as a technician in a geophysics firm in South Africa, Loxton Hunting, a subsidiary of the Huntings Group, actually doing gravity surveys to see if I could find sinkholes so a graveyard could be sited in Boksburg outside Johannesburg, and taking soil samples looking for expanding clays so that the money-grabbing real estate developers could build housing developments without them sort of bending and buckling on top of Montmorillonite. And then I went to Cambridge, close to where you were born, James, and where you grew up, and studied geology, very academic geology, and loved it. I had a wonderful 3 years studying all the perspectives and facets of geology, geophysics, sedimentology, crystallography, mineralogy. There was a geochemistry teacher called Warrington Cameron at Cambridge, and he was a guerrilla, undercover champion of economic geology, something completely unacceptable in Cambridge in my time. And I remember he quietly laid out, without any fanfare, some metallogenetic maps of parts of the world in the mineralogy lab while we were looking down the microscope at various minerals, including all minerals, metals. And I remember seeing a metallogenetic map of Canada as I was doing my last courses, as I was finishing my work in Cambridge in 1977. And I remember being absolutely hypnotized by the beauty and the excitement and the realization that all this wonderful geology I'd been learning could actually be applied to finding treasure. It's surprising, since I grew up in a mining family in South Africa, but I had really rejected that. I had fallen in love with the science of geology and suddenly fell in love with the possibility of using geology for exploration. And so really from that impulsive moment, another one, in Cambridge, I really decided to follow a route of economic geology and started searching for a place where I could study economic geology and also study a little bit of the ways of the world in business.